It's September 11th, 2015. I'm Sue Cohen, and we have the privilege of interviewing Polly Wright today, born in San Marcos, for the Heritage Association of San Marcos and the Hays County Historical Commission. So, good to see you today, Polly. Why don't you start off telling us a little bit about your family and how they came to San Marcos and when they came and
Well, I was born in San Marcos on Hopkins Street and the corner of Blanco Street. My my father's mother's name was Jamie Ragsdale, and she came here with her two little boys after her husband had died to see her in-laws who had a feed store in San Marcos, and met Mr. Ragsdale, and they got married and had two more boys. And they lived in the white two-story house on Blanco and Rogers Street, then moved to what's now Houston Heights on a farm, and then moved back to the two-story house where my grandmother lived until she was 100 years old, and she fell and broke her hip and had to go to the nursing home. My other grandmother lived in the house where I was born on the corner of Blanco and Hopkins Street. My mother's father had died when she was 5 years old riding his horse to Abilene, and my grandmother had died that grandmother died a few months before I was born, so my mother and daddy were living in that house. I went all my school years to San Marcos, 12 years, and it was all up on top of the hill at that time. Our class was the last class to be up on top of the hill.
were you born in a hospital or?
No, I was born in the house. The doctor lived next door.
And which doctor was that?
It was Dr. Edwards. And
What year?
What year? 1933.
Okay.
And he used to take me with him to the Rotary Club, I believe it was, to tap dance. And then when it got older and the war was on and they were wanting to feed the starving children in foreign countries, they came up with the idea I should be a starving refugee. Well, I didn't really want to be a starving refugee, so I didn't do exactly what I was told. And they were meeting up on the top floor of what was in the fire station, and I got a whipping all the way down the steps because I didn't do what I was supposed to do about being a starving orphan.
They wanted you to dance as a starving orphan?
No, I danced first when I was a little bitty. And then when I got older and the war came along, they thought I should put on a
Fundraising.
a thing about being a starving orphan. Well, I preferred to dance, not starving orphans.
How did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had one sister. Her name was Mary Patricia, but we all called her Patty. And after my mother died, and we went to the lawyer's office, and the lawyer kept saying something about Mary. And I said, "Please tell me, who is Mary?" She says, "That's your sister." I said, "Oh, I never called her Mary in my whole life." So
Patricia was her middle name.
and we called her Patty.
Okay.
And my mother had a sister that worked at the First National Bank at that time, and they lived in Staples. And she had a brother that had lived in West Texas out on the farm where their mother and daddy had lived to begin with. And my daddy had his older brother who was a lawyer in Houston. He did live here for a while, but not long. And then we had Uncle George and Uncle Wilburn, and they were Mr. Ragsdale's children. Uncle Wilburn is now 95 years old last week, and he's
Wow.
still going strong.
Wow. And he's your uncle.
He's my daddy's youngest brother, half-brother, yeah.
And what did your daddy do for a living?
My daddy was co-owner for the Houston Meat Company at last. He was a butcher, and he worked with Norman Jackson on the corner of Hopkins and what's now LBJ. It was Calcutta's and Frontier Store and all that, but it was a grocery store when I was a kid.
And he was the meat.
And he was a meat butcher, yeah.
What was the name of that grocery store?
Jackson's Grocery Store. And then he worked for Moore Grocery Company. My mother's great uncle, Orrin Patterson, ran Moore Grocery Company for Mr. Moore, and he worked in there for a long time, and then he got together with Tex Houston and some other men and had Houston Meat Company. They bought it from the other ones.
When you were a little girl, did you get to play in the grocery store? And
Yeah.
spend
not
time?
in the,
You have
in
memories of spending
but then
time
my
there?
granddaddy had a grocery store. Ragsdale had one down there where Wally's is now, and we'd go in there all the time. But I didn't get to have candy. I had to have weenies. Weenies were better for you, I guess, than candy.
So where you lived, you walked all over town as a kid, I would
Mhm.
guess.
First, we lived up behind the college, which is now Sesame Street, and they let me go to kindergarten when I was 3 years old because it was right across the street over in the girls' gym at the college. The college was all up on the hill, just real clustered together then. And after a couple of years, they decided I'd been to kindergarten long enough. They let me start school at 5 just to get rid of me, I think. But and then we moved to another place it's now on Edward Gary Street. It was a different Cedar Street, I believe, at that time, across the street from where Edward Gary lived. And my grandfather, Patterson, great-grandfather, he had 9 children and 9 farms, and one of the sisters was married to one of the Garys. So in a roundabout sort of way, in San Marcos Lower, we were kin to Edward Gary a little bit. And, of course, he died at Pearl Harbor.
Right. What year did you graduate from high school?
1951. And that's a long time ago.
Do you keep up with any of your classmates from
yes.
high school?
When I leave here Saturday tomorrow, I'm going to spend the night with Taffy Weatherford, who used to live there on Hopkins Street, and with all her 6 brothers and sisters, and we're going to spend 2 nights there, and then I'll go back down to Round Rock to the doctor, and then on back home again. But we do that I have to go to that doctor 4 times a year, so we do that 4 times a year.
Who else do you keep up with from your class?
Well, we see Phyllis Berry all the time, and sometimes Peggy Strunk Layton. She comes from California. About once a year we see her. And
so you were in junior high during the war years. You were in elementary school?
Yeah. Because I started to school in 1936, I think, somewhere along in there. 1st grade.
What did you teenage girls do for fun there in the 1950s?
We were really terrible. We liked to go to the cemetery and lay in the graves. Now, we didn't damage a single thing. We'd find somebody that had a concrete walk around the edge of it or something, and just lay in it with your hands. But everybody thought we were terrible. But we never desecrated anything.
Did you do that during the daytime?
Yeah. You could get in.
Just lay on the grave and...
Yeah, we just having fun, taking pictures. We didn't do anything wrong. We just was...
What'd y'all do on Halloween? Did you celebrate Halloween back then?
Oh, Halloween, when we were really young, was really fun. You put on your costumes, and all the people on the square kept their stores open, and they'd pass out candy to you. And
so you trick-or-treated around the square.
You didn't go to houses and trick-or-treated. You went to the square, and everybody gave you candy and stuff like that. But can't do that anymore. I told somebody not too many years back, if you want to take your kids to the square on Halloween, you better be prepared to buy them a drink. That's all you can do.
So y'all went to the movies and...
Yeah, and I worked. When you couldn't go to work till you were 16. You couldn't have a Social Security card till you were 16 then.
So where did you work?
So I worked at all the picture shows. First one place and then another.
And did you get to go to the movies free when you worked there?
Yeah, I sold the popcorn first, and then I'd sell the tickets, and I did everything before I stopped working.
So there were 2 movie theaters on the square, right?
Well, there was one on the west side of the square, which was they're the longest, the oldest one. Then they built
was
one
that the Holiday?
No.
Palace.
The Palace.
The Palace.
That's where the LBJ Museum is now.
That's right. And then there was the one over on the south side of the square, and that, I think, was the Holiday. And then there's one up there where Emeralds is now, which is across the street from Wally's.
On LBJ, that was a movie theater, so I guess it's been torn down?
No, they remodeled it.
Because it doesn't look like a theater at all.
No, they redid
the other 2 kind of look like old theaters.
They changed it, but they were the theaters, and Mr. Stagger had a popcorn shop in the corner there before you went into the picture show itself.
So you bought your popcorn from the popcorn shop.
Mm-hmm.
How much did the tickets go for when you were selling them?
Oh, when I was selling them, there was a nickel on Saturday morning, and you got dime. You got a nickel for the show and a nickel for your popcorn.
And it was segregated.
Yeah.
And they paid a nickel too? They paid the same amount?
I don't remember that part, that they ever even came, if you want to know the truth
Oh,
about
really?
the matter. Yeah, because schools weren't even integrated at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Your graduating class was all...
We had 3 elementary schools. The colored kids went to their school where Dunbar is. The Mexican kids went to the south side, where that is now, until 6th grade. And then at 6th grade, they came and went to school with us up on top of the hill. But the colored kids never came to join our school.
That was in the 60s that San Marcos became integrated.
Yeah. And people say I can't say that because it's not politically correct anymore, but to me that's not the point. That's history to me.
That's the words. That's the way it was.
That's the way it happened. That's just it. You can't change it.
Did you swim in the river?
Oh, yes. I had a great aunt that had a place called Vogel Sing's Lodges down there where Clear Springs Apartments used to be.
People talk about that place.
And you swam on that side of the river where lately they've been swimming on the street side. But you went to that place because they were like a motel up on stilts. And that's where people went to stay to go and fish.
And so you got to go there because your aunt had the place.
Mm-hmm.
And y'all would walk down there or ride your bikes?
Well, we didn't go without our parents.
Oh, okay.
We didn't go swimming until we got in high school. I mean, seniors in high school.
Some of the men we've interviewed were allowed to ride their bikes and the girls.
Girls don't do that.
Didn't have as much freedom, it seems, as the men that we've interviewed from this same era.
And then as we got older, we swam across the street from that over in the Sewell Park there. And then there was 3 places to swim. 2 of them, one was like the college pool place, and then you go down a little further, and then you go down to the last one down there where the park is now, where the rapids and things are.
What kind of chores did you have to do at home as a little girl?
Oh, I had to rake the chicken yard every Saturday morning before I could have my dime to go to the movie with.
So y'all had chickens in your backyard?
Yes, and we lived on Mitchell Street between Hopkins Street and San Antonio Street. And we had chickens in the backyard. And poor one chicken, I got mad at him one time and I kicked him. And nobody ever figured out what that chicken died of. And I never did tell him either.
Well, chickens can be a messy bunch. That's quite a job.
Yeah. And then my daddy had a cow that he staked out on a place that's up behind where Kathy and Mike Dillon live now, up in the
Burleson Street?
Yeah, up on behind the houses on Burleson Street in a farm, in a barn. And we have to go up there. You had to get up every Monday morning to do the laundry also.
What'd you have to do with the cow?
Make sure he got fed and watered and stuff like that.
You didn't have to milk him.
No.
Wasn't that kind of cow?
Wasn't that kind of cow?
It was a cow that you were going to have meat out of.
Yeah. Yep, we always had meat. That's one thing.
So in the laundry, I guess you hung it out on the line.
Yes, ma'am. 5 o'clock on Monday morning, you was out wringing the clothes through the wringer and getting them ready and go putting them on the line. And you had to be ready to go to school when the school bus came too, or you had to walk.
Clotheslines are, you don't see clotheslines anymore.
No clotheslines anymore.
And you certainly don't see ringers.
No.
So you and your mama and your sister did the laundry?
Uh-huh. And we had wash tubs that sat around the machine that you used to wring them out in. And of course we had to keep the house clean too. We always had to do stuff.
And you didn't have air conditioning?
No, we had window units or evaporative coolers or whatever you call them. Now, I don't know if they even have them anymore where you ran water through it. And we had an attic fan in the hall between the 2 bedrooms that suck the air through, and then you ran the water hoses outside the windows and stuff like that.
And you had a phone, one phone?
One phone in that
In the
same
hallway, yeah.
Our number, I think, was like 123 or something, and it was a party line.
Right there in
If
town.
you picked it up at the right time, you could hear the neighbors talking too.
That must have been fun.
And the fire department was all volunteer fire people. My daddy was a volunteer fireman. When the siren went off, you went to the phone, you picked it up, and the operator told you where it was, and everybody got in the car and went.
Do you remember any big
There was
events like that?
there was a big one down on the square. I can't remember exactly where, because I was pretty little then, but we always went.
Oh, your daddy went and then y'all went?
We all went in the same car.
You took your daddy.
Yeah.
And what did you do at the fire scenes?
Just sit there and watch. And make sure you stay out of the way so you don't get in trouble. But we always, you had to have 3 meals a day. You go home at lunch, you had to
Even
eat.
from school?
Yeah, you had to go home and eat, and then you had to do the dishes and get back to school.
So you would ride the bus to school and then you would walk home for lunch, or?
I don't remember that particular part, but I just know we always had to get everything done and be back to school in time. You couldn't be late. That was just a definite no-no.
And people didn't eat out much in those days.
Well, there wasn't any place really to eat. You had Alex Cafe, which was down there where that funeral home, Los Angeles Funeral Home is now. It was one shotgun house. You know what a shotgun house is. You go through the front door and walk to the back, one room at a time. And it was a shotgun house, and Alex served his Mexican food there. And there was a Texaco station out on the highway going towards Austin where you could get a hamburger. And there was Papa's Cafe on the square, and that was it till they built the Carson's restaurant out there on what was the Circle.
Do you remember how old you were the first time you went out of town from San Marcos, and where did you go?
Well, Mother and Daddy liked to go on trips, and Mother had all her relatives were in West Texas, so we made a lot of trips to Aspermont, Peacock. You ever heard of Peacock? Oh, Glory. That's where all my mother's relatives lived out there.
Okay.
And my grandmother was from San Marcos, and she married a man from out there and moved out there till he died.
Okay.
And then she moved back here. Her father's house was where that fourplex is. I think it's a fourplex, red brick there on Hopkins Street, right next, across the street from Moore, the Moore's house. There's in the middle of the block. It's a brick fourplex. And he had a big white 2-story house there.
Like in the 700, 800 block? I'm not. What block was it?
It's the block before you get to Guzman's law office, which is the house
That's
I
the
was born
600 block.
Yeah, yeah. And my grandmother, there was one more house on the corner, and then across the street was my grandmother's house.
And it's no longer there.
My grandmother's house?
Right.
Yes, that's Art Guzman's law office.
Oh, that was your grandmother's house.
That was that grandmother's
So across
house.
the street there was a different house. That's been torn down, and it's a newer building across the street.
Yeah.
What was across the street at that time?
Well, across the street was just another big old house, and Shirley Wickersham built that
And tore down
those townhouses there. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot of the old houses aren't there anymore.
Yeah. Quite a few of them.
What did you do when you graduated from high school? What was your next step in life?
I got married.
She's in the DRT, so you can get some old Texas insurance. Okay. You got married to a man from.
Well, he was working at the radio station at the time and going to college up here. And Mr. and Ms. Mansky, who had the Mansky Roll place, was their dorm people up there at the college, and he knew them, and that's about it. And I was working at the radio station at that time, so.
And what was his name?
Stripling, Luke Stripling. And we got married and had 4 kids. And that kept me busy for a while.
So you were a homemaker.
Yeah, that's an all.
You didn't work outside the home after high school. You just got married.
I just got married.
How old were you when you got married?
18.
How old were you when your first child was born?
18. And I had 4 in 3.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
You were busy.
That's what I say. I didn't waste any time.
That's a lot of laundry.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, and we didn't have paper diapers either.
And what did Mr. Stripling do?
Radio announcer, an engineer.
And so he kept doing that all those years?
He did, yes. He was worked at. We eventually moved down to close across the bay from Galveston, and he worked 2 different radio stations in Texas City and the one in Galveston. He stayed when Hurricane Carla came, which will be tomorrow, and from 1960 till tomorrow. He stayed at the radio station, and I brought the 4 kids home in the car to San Marcos.
That was quite the hurricane.
Yes, it was. I had water up to my window sills at that time.
It's a house you were living in. And so
I
you
went
came back to a flooded house.
Yeah. When I went back down there, I left the kids here, and I went back down there, and I found my mailbox 3 blocks from home in the field, so I knew I'd had some water. And I had a whole house full.
And you cleaned it up and moved back in?
It sure did. You didn't just run off and leave them then.
And you didn't call the government to help you. You just
Nope,
did it.
The government never helped me either. My uncle gave me $100, and that was a lot of money then, so that's the kind of help we got.
So when did you come back to San Marcos?
Oh, I've come back several times.
Okay.
I usually move off, and then I turn around and I come back. But I was married 11 years the first time, and I came back.
Okay.
And then I got married the second time, and my husband died a month short of us being married for 3 years. And then when I got married the next time, we moved to San Antonio and back a couple of times and all that, but I always came back. Then I went to Oklahoma for about 10 years, and I came back from there in 1995, and I was here until 2.5 years ago that time.
Well, you might still come back. There's a lot of people that are hoping you might still come back. Now, do your kids live here, any of them?
My daughter lives here.
Okay.
And I have a son that lives in Lockhart and works here. He works for Wildlight. I don't know that it's called Wildlight anymore, but that's where he works. And I live with my youngest son, and then I have one that lives on the Gulf Coast.
So where are you living now?
In Somerville.
Somerville.
DRT stuff. You say about that, or you think wait till later?
And I'm trying to figure. You're active in the DRT. You want to tell me about your?
Well, actually, I belong to the DRT.
And that stands for?
The Daughters of the Republic of Texas, because I had relatives that came before 1836. My 4th or 5th great-grandfather way back down the line was one of the original land grant owners from Stephen F. Austin. His name was Jacob Eberly. And his second wife, because his wife, when they came to Texas, died shortly after they got here, along with the baby. And his second wife was Angelina Eberly, and she was called the Lady Cannoneer. He had died after that, before that, but she lived in Austin running a boarding house, and Sam Houston wanted the capital to be in Houston. So he sent some men up here to get the archives away from Austin and take them to Houston. Well, she caught on to them, and she caught them, and she fired the cannon to break the town up so that they would stop them from taking the archives to Houston, and they did. And there is a statue of her on the corner of the 6th and Congress in Austin with her cannon and her cigar.
I've seen it.
Yes.
I did a walking tour. I've seen it.
Well,
and that was your
I think it's 4 great-grandfather's second
wife.
Yeah, she's not actually my kin, but, she was married to. And used to, when we lived in San Marcos, you was kin to nearly everybody in town. Because if you was kin to one person and somebody else was kin to them too, that made all of you kin.
That is interesting.
And then I belong to the DAR, and I belong to the Magna Carta Dames, which means my ancestors I think it was 5 of the barons were my ancestors that signed the Magna Carta in 1215.
And the DAR stands for Daughters of the Republic.
The Daughters of the American Republic.
Revolution.
No,
Revolution.
American Revolution, yeah.
So your roots are deep.
Way back. Mm.
What do you? I know you are very fond of San Marcos, and what do you remember is so special? Special memories of San Marcos
Well,
makes it so special in your mind.
it was home. You knew everybody. And sometimes that wasn't so good when you was doing things you really shouldn't. But anyway, you knew everybody, and everybody knew you. You were well taken care of. And all my kinfolks lived here. I don't have very many left anymore. My uncle's about the only one that's left besides me. He can't quite grasp that at 95 that he wants to know where somebody is. And I said, well, Uncle Wilburn, he's dead, you know. And then we go on down the list that way. And I said, well, there's only you and me left. Do you understand that? He says, oh, okay. But it was just where you grew up, where you lived. And it's not that way anymore.
No, it's changed a lot.
Yeah.
So y'all had special Christmas traditions and holiday traditions.
Mm-hmm.
What were the holiday traditions at Christmas in San Marcos back then?
Well, they didn't really. You did everything at home, you know, and things like that. We didn't decorate. We didn't have any lights down in the trees or anything like that. So, but everybody's house was decorated and things.
On the inside.
Yeah, and outside, and everybody went to their own house, you know, for Christmas. It was
Right.
everybody was family oriented then.
What church did y'all go to?
Went to the Methodist church.
The First Methodist?
I have a pen that says I never missed a day of Sunday school for about 12 years. So.
Well, that's pretty
But
notable.
You went all the time. I mean, you know, and I sang in the choir.
Uh-huh.
And just the normal things that we considered normal that everybody did.
Right.
I graduated from high school with the most credits that anybody had ever graduated from the school with at that time.
How did you manage that?
I just took extra things. Summer school, like typing, and never did learn how to type, but, you know, I took it anyway. And just, I was always working on sewing projects for home economics and stuff like that. You had different things that you could do for extra credits and stuff. And I just thought I was supposed to go every hour was supposed to be a class, not a fun thing, you know. I remember I gathered all the money for the cookbook to sell so we could take our senior trip.
Where did y'all go?
We went to Galveston.
How many in your graduating class?
There was 76, and we still get together periodically. What's
Y'all
beginning?
Y'all took a
beginning
bus
left of
and
it.
spent the night in Galveston, went to the beach, and you sold a cookbook?
I sold ads in a cookbook so we could go. It was
Wow.
kind of like the cookbook that the Heritage Association has now. But we had a trip.
So
Wow.
she has some good. She tell you that the Heritage Association used to be like in the old, because she's a president.
Because you were an early member of the Heritage Association.
Well, actually, I wasn't, but my mother was one of the first ones because I didn't live here then. So I didn't join till after I came back this last time, that, you know, and worked in it. But my mother worked in it along with Francis Stovall and all those. I don't know that they worked that hard back then, you know. It was more of a let's go to the party thing. But they had their things that they did.
Right.
And they had their they put on their long dresses and go do the thing at the cock house, way back then even.
Right.
And,
The Bicentennial Bells.
yeah.
Now, do you remember, we just had this big Memorial Day flood. Do you remember any big weather events from your growing up? Any big flood? I know there's been many big floods.
Well, there's been a lot of them, but and they keep building things now on land that was all underwater at one time or another. I mean, you know, I can't understand that, but that's I'm not a business person. Why you'd want to build a whole subdivision?
Seems like a bad idea, doesn't it?
Does to me when you think about what's going to happen to him one of these days. Because
Well, I guess your father is a volunteer fire. He got called out on more than just fire. He got called out on floods and.
well, they didn't have to do that then because people didn't build their houses back then in those kind of places. They
So
had
when
them
it
up high.
flooded, you just stayed away from the river.
You just didn't drive out the Hunter Road when it rained because you couldn't get past there. And you knew that. And you acted like good sense and didn't go that way.
Huh.
So, but everybody just was helpful. And you knew everybody around the square, shop-wise and all that. And it was just a friendly place to be.
Did they have parades back then?
Oh, yeah, we had parades.
What occasions would they have parades?
Oh, well, we had parades for Memorial Day, you know, those kind of holidays where the soldiers marched, because it was back during the war a lot then. And all the pep squads and the bands and all that went around that square a million times sometimes if you got it all done.
Now, you remember as a kid during World War II, did it affect your family, like as far as...
Well, my daddy never went because, you know, some people were the right age and some people were too young, some people were too old. Somehow or another, he fit right in the middle of that category and had 2 kids besides, so he never did have to go. But my uncle was in the Air Force, my Uncle Wilburn.
Uh-huh.
He was in the Air Force and was in China.
The town had a lot... That was a boom time for the town when all the Air Force...
Oh, yeah.
You remember memories of that?
Oh, yes. Everybody had to take their spare bedrooms. The 4 of us, we lived in a 2-bedroom house, but we all moved into 1 bedroom, and you rented out the other bedroom, and you only had 1 bathroom, but everybody shared it.
And I understand the married couples that rented those rooms were pretty lucky to get them. There was a shortage.
Oh, yeah. Well, we didn't
There was
have-
nowhere for the married couples to
There was
live.
no apartments then. There were a few places up over the double stores around the square. But there were no apartment buildings, or there was a couple of boarding houses, you know, and there was no motels. Like I say, that Vogelsang's Lodges, that was the thing that was considered a motel around here. Or a fishing house would be the only thing, but there just wasn't any spare places for people to live. And we always had that 1 room rented out. And we lived all 4 of us lived in 1 bedroom, and that was the way it was around with most people.
I've heard that.
Yeah. And anybody that had a great big 2-story house and had lots of bedrooms, well, they had a boom in economy because they could rent out all of them. And the people that rented those rooms wound up being friends. I mean, lifelong friends. The people that stayed with my mother and daddy came from Kansas, and they until my mother and daddy were both gone, they were still communicating with them.
Did you know Miss Sutton that had the real estate office in the house where I live on San Antonio Street? Because she rented out the 2 upstairs was turned into apartments.
Yeah. Well, that's what everybody did. They just converted anything they could into something.
Yeah. The lady came one day I was out in the yard and this couple stopped. They were from Kansas also, and they'd lived there during the war, and he'd become a Kansas state senator. And she says she put on her finest outfit and rode the bus when she found out there was a room available to try to get it because there was such a shortage.
Yeah. And of course there was no place out there for them to live where the Air Force base was built.
If they couldn't find a place to live, their wife couldn't come with them.
Yeah.
They had to live in the barracks out there, is what I understood.
Mm-hmm.
Were there shortages that affected your family during that time, like gasoline or food? Were you aware of that as a child?
Oh yeah, you always knew what you could and couldn't do. We managed to have groceries all the time because my family was always in the grocery type business, so there was never any shortage of food. But you know, you had your gasoline stamps and all those different kind of things like that you could only you knew what you could use and what you couldn't, and you didn't try to. At least nobody I knew tried to fudge on it. I mean, that was the rules. You lived by the rules then. So.
And people traveled by train back then as well.
Yeah.
You
I remember
the. Yeah, go ahead.
My grandmother took my sister and I when we were really little. Her mother and sisters lived in San Augustine, Texas, and so she took my sister and I on the train. So we could ride the train, and we went from San Marcos to Palestine, and then they came and picked us up there, so we could have a train ride.
That was quite the adventure.
Oh yes, and then there was the time that they had this contest back then. It was called Make It With Wool. Well, I had sewed since I was 3 years old. So Miss Bess Barnes, who was my home economics teacher, decided they should enter me in that thing, and it was in Kansas City, Missouri. Well, I was in the 9th grade, little old country girl here, and I got on that train to go to Kansas City, Missouri by myself, and I thought, man.
With your wool garment that you
made?
With my wool
garment that I'd made, yes.
All by yourself?
All by myself, and I was like pretty scared, if you want to know the truth about the matter. But there was 2 other girls from further over in East Texas were going too, and at some point we got together, so the 3 of us rode.
Did you spend the night on the train? It was overnight?
Yeah. And ate. And when you had never done anything,
That's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
How'd you do in the contest?
Oh, I got an honorable mention, something or other, but like I say, some of those girls were putting out professional-looking clothes, and all I did was just what you learn to do here in home economics class. But of course, I never had a store-bought dress till after I graduated from high school. So.
Wow. Do you still sew?
Occasionally,
you sewed, lifetime sewing?
I don't make my clothes anymore. You can buy them too much easier than that, but I do make curtains. And
what other hobbies do you have?
Well, not much now since I don't have a house.
Or did you have?
I did have. I like to work on interior decorating and stuff like that. I lived in a house on Hopkins Street for 13 years, and I tell you, the worst day of my life was the day that man told me I had to move because he was selling my house. I felt like he'd killed me off. But I had really enjoyed working on that. I've never had a house of my own.
And you were on the home tour in that house, and you showed off your collections. You have a lot of collections.
Yeah. And right now they're all in a storage room in Brenham. But I really wish I could do something to get them back into a house.
Right.
I miss my things.
Yeah.
I don't know whether everybody else does or not, but I miss my things.
Yeah. You've seen lots of changes over the year.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
just the technology, the changes from when you were growing up to now.
Yeah.
The different ways people live in.
Well, the way you used to pick up the telephone and tell them what number you wanted. You don't do that anymore.
Operator.
Yeah. You get the operator on and she can help you.
And I guess you remember the first TV you saw.
The first TV I ever had, my daughter was already born, and she's my 3rd child. So it was 1955 or 6, somewhere along in there. First time I had a TV set.
Big old black and white.
Oh yeah, a big old black and white. And but things lasted longer then too.
They did.
And you fixed things back then too. You didn't just go out and have to buy another one because it was cheaper to buy another one than it was to fix it.
I don't even think they have TV repair shops anymore. They used to.
Well, I used to could take the tubes out and go down and check them and fix it myself.
You learned to be pretty handy all those years.
And I can remember every time I moved, I had to crawl on the roof to move the TV antenna too. But, you just have to adapt to whatever goes along. I'm not too good at a computer yet, but I'll still try.
You were president of Heritage Association, right?
No, just
President of
just
the Guild.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, I never was that ambitious.
You were, if I recall, a worker bee. You did the lemonade stand for the home tour.
Yeah.
You were the lemonade queen
Yeah.
for years and years. I'm surprised since you moved away. I don't know how we do lemonade anymore without you.
Well, it got to the point I just couldn't really carry the tables and things around anymore. You get too old to carry stuff very much anymore.
So you're going to have a birthday in November and be 82.
And everybody says, well, you really need to come back to San Marcos. I said, well, let's look at it this way. I will eventually. I already have a cemetery lot and a tombstone, so
up there where you used to play down.
Where
So
I used to
eventually
play.
you're going to go up there and lay down
That's right.
for
I'll
good.
lay down there with the rest of my kinfolks.
That's a beautiful cemetery
Yeah.
up there. And so y'all have your family, your parents, and
No, my parents are out on the highway going towards Martindale. But my grandmother and my uncles and a great aunt and my husband and my son are up there. So yeah, and my sister and her husband.
and your husband died young. The one that died after 3 years of marriage. What happened to him?
He had rheumatic fever when he was a little bitty kid, and it calcimated his heart valve, and he had to have a artificial heart valve put in, and that was back when they had just started doing that.
And they did pig valves,
And no, this was the little wire cage with a marble in it,
and you could hear it.
and you could hear it. And
My dad had the same exact
Yeah.
thing, and you could hear it if you listened to his deal. And then they took that out and put a pig valve in.
Well, he died when he had a disagreement with one of my older kids, and he fell down on the ground and it knocked it loose. And
Ooh.
by the time they got it opened up, we're getting ready to redo it, he was gone.
So you remember going to the hospital that used to be on Belvin Street, the old.
That's where my sister was born. I never had to go to the hospital.
Is
There.
she how? What's the age difference between you and your
It was
sister?
2 years and 9 months. My mother's father's.
So you were born at home, but
Yeah.
she was born 2 years later. They
Uh-huh.
in the hospital.
Yeah.
So she was.
That was the more uptown, yeah. Yeah. But like, cause the doctor was right next door, there wasn't any point to going anywhere else, and that was back during the Depression. You did what was cheapest, and it was cheapest to stay at home. So
And a lot of the doctors, a lot of the homes in the historical district, they had their home and office.
yeah,
Dr. Williams on San Antonio Street, and then what was the doctor that on Hopkins that
Dr. Edwards. Now he had an office up over the Duke and Ayers or somewhere up in that bunch where they had offices up there too.
with Dr. Moore?
Dr. Moore had the same place later on. Yes,
Mhm.
he was a later version.
At the same.
In the same office, yeah. Because when they got so old, and they'd sell off to somebody else, and then they'd take over. what was
And then
there.
slowly all those businesses,
Yeah,
the grocery stores, there were 3 or 4 grocery
Yeah.
stores. There were a couple of restaurants down on the square.
and then slowly but surely, just all.
And the Duke and Ayers was
Oh yeah, Duke and Ayers was the main place to go.
and
It was literally a 5 and dime store. You'd go in and spend your nickels and your dimes there.
it was a neat store. I remember it.
And then on down from there, Woods Jewelry was in there for a while, and it was at several places actually. Woods Jewelry was, but it was moved around. But it was they all sort of had to move out. They started putting the stores out away from town, like they built Springtown Mall.
Progress.
Yeah, progress is supposed to be good, but I don't think so. I'm not easily swayed with progress.
You like San Marcos the way it was
I liked
in,
it the way it was. Yes.
in the 50s?
Yeah, in the 50s was good.
What was your favorite era of when you lived in San Marcos?
Era?
The 40s when you were a kid, or
Well,
I mean, it was growing by the 50s.
By the 50s, I graduated from high school in 51, moved away from here in 52, so I wasn't here for the 50s.
What was the biggest thing ever happened?
Yeah, what's the biggest event you remember happening that just set the town abuzz?
I'm trying to. Do we have that great one big fire? I don't know, but I think it may have been that Field Furniture store. It was somewhere down on that corner of the square. But that was talked about for a long time. Big fire. And I can't remember much of anything else that we really did. We just went along.
No big crimes or...
Oh, Lord, no.
I guess you didn't lock your houses back then, or...
No. It was really... The main thing, crime-wise, was once they brought the Gary Job Corps in, and those boys would get out there and they'd line up across... They did this to me, so it's not something I heard. They lined up. Well, I didn't try to stop. I just kept on going. Well, they finally got out of the way. They decided it's best to move on over because I wasn't going to stop for them. But, things like that we weren't used to having because we didn't have kids that behaved like that. Why? They got into trouble. I mean, everybody steal watermelons or turn over the outhouses. Or I didn't do that because I knew if I did something like that, my mother'd kill me. But there were kids that would go do things like that. But like I say, we went to the cemetery. Well, nowadays they'd be up there wrecking the tombstones or something. We wouldn't have. God, that would never have entered our head that we would hurt anything.
You were just hanging out.
We were just having a good time, laughing and running and playing. Would never have hurt anything to destroy it or anything like that. But,
Movies? Were you here when they made the getaway?
That was
no,
the 70s.
I didn't live here then, but I knew all about it.
That was a big thing when
Yeah.
that happened.
I've come and gone a lot of times.
Any politicians show up? Big time politicians?
Oh, well, now that's one thing. When we used to have, when we were really little, everybody, the trains had come through town that had the candidates for president and whatever on it. Well, it might be they're coming through at 3 o'clock in the morning. But you had to get up, get dressed, and drive down there and sit by the side of the railroad track and watch the train go by. You never saw any of the people.
And they wouldn't stop?
No. You just watched the train go by.
How did y'all know to do that?
Our parents told us we had to do that. That was something you were missing history. You had to go watch that train drive through.
Well, and LBJ used to come back and visit
Yeah.
San Marcos all the time.
But by then, there again, I was not here.
Right.
But these were the people that were, like I say, the trains were just traveling from one town to another.
Uh-huh.
And it just happened to be that's the time of day they were going through here. So, but you had to watch that train go through. It was,
Anything else you want to share with us before we close, Polly? Anything you...
I can't really think of
Well,
anything.
you've had quite some experiences here, born in San Marcos.
Yeah.
You've seen it.
I know one thing that really
Okay.
upset me more than anything else is when that old hospital was burned down. I really wanted to do something with that. In fact, I called the man that owned it one time, and this was not too long before it was burned down. I said, really, can we make a bed and breakfast out of it? So he said, well, I thought about it, but I, don't think do this. I said, well, I just really would like to do that. I've always wanted a place with a lot of bedrooms and stuff like that in it because I just have a lot of ideas. And I said, I don't think they'd go for a bordello, but, could we do a bed and breakfast? And he said, I don't think they would either.
A missed opportunity.
Yes, I think so.
Well, thank you so much, Polly. It's really been interesting hearing your stories.